Hey guys, today we're going to talk about and walk through the three circles. The three circles are just the revelation that God has given us as a church about the gospel. The word gospel just means good news. It's the story of the life and victory of Jesus. It's not just a ticket to heaven or something to have someday. It's about living an abundant and free life today, a life defined by hope. But before we can talk about this, we need to first realize why the gospel is good news to us. Jesus came to seek and save what was lost. And so, to understand what we receive in Jesus, we first have to recognize what was lost in Adam. See, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and everything in it. He created Adam and Eve, a beloved son and daughter that were in perfect relationship with the Father and with a kingdom purpose. And there was just one thing that God asked them not to do, and that was to not eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But they did. And in just 3 short chapters, we lost that identity, that relationship, and that purpose. Sin entered the world, and we began striving and performing and trying to earn back what was lost. We started pursuing God, which was religion, man's search for God. But God always had a plan, Jesus. And the three circles tell that story. So, circle one is all about identity, about receiving God's grace. When we receive grace, our identity changes. In Romans 5:19 it says, through the disobedience of the one man, Adam, many were made sinners. See, this is our born identity. You aren't a sinner because you sin because you're a sinner. We will always fall short when we try to change our behavior, because what we really need is for Jesus to change our identity. But look at the second half of that verse. So also through the obedience of the one man, Jesus, the many will be made righteous. It's Jesus' actions that change our identity. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we may have the righteousness of God. Jesus came, lived a perfect life, died on the cross, rose 3 days later, defeating death. He took the punishment for us so that we could have his innocence, his righteousness, or right standing with God. And just like we couldn't do anything to get out of sin on our own, there's nothing that we can do to now lose that righteousness that we have in Jesus. When we confess our sin and profess that Jesus is Lord and what he did for us, what is true of Jesus then becomes true of us. We now are beloved sons and daughters before we do anything right and even after we do everything wrong. And that statement changes everything. When we receive that kind of grace, we can't help but want to experience God's presence. And that leads us to circle two. See, now that I'm not afraid, I'm not ashamed, and I know he loves me, I can go right in and meet with my Father. In Ephesians 3:12, it says, because of Christ and our faith in him, we can now come boldly and confidently into God's presence. But we may be hesitant to approach God. Maybe we view him as distant or angry, or maybe we see him as a taskmaster that's just waiting for us to mess up. Our perception of God can be shaped and developed through experiences in life and relationships with earthly father figures. But the truth is, God is a good, loving Father, and he loves the name Father most of all. See, where religion says, I've messed up, I need to go hide, relationship says, I've messed up, I need to go run to my Father. In 2 Corinthians 3:17, it says, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. In God's presence, in relationship, is where we're truly free. We're free from shame and guilt, striving and performing. Our relationship isn't about pursuing him. It's always been about God pursuing us. See, God is just waiting for us to look to him, and he is already running headfirst towards us. He wants us to experience him in our homes, our teams, our work, our families, in every area of our life. See, God is always accessible, which means hope is always accessible. Hope for us as we carry hope to others. In Jesus, we are fully known and fully loved with no fear of rejection from our good Father. So, with our identity restored in Jesus and our relationship reconciled with God, we now know who we are and who God is. When we receive God's grace and experience his presence, it leads us to our purpose. Circle 3, release his kingdom. Because now we know that we are beloved sons and daughters of the King, we can now live as co-heirs with Christ. We don't have to figure out why we're here. God gives us our created purpose. In Genesis 1:28, it says, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, using its vast resources in the service of God and men." It is the same kingdom purpose that God gave Adam and Eve. And all it means is to be fruitful. Just bring things to their fullest potential. Multiply. Reproduce the life of God that's in me back into the world. Fill the earth. Saturate our areas of influence with the knowledge of the glory of God. Subdue it. Bring order to chaos and bring things back into alignment. And using its vast resources, that just means to use our giftings, our talents, and our finances to carry hope of Jesus to other people. See, we are created to be hope carriers, a movement of hope. The hope that is in us is intended to flow out of us. And so that is our purpose. And where the 3 circles intersect, that is the Father's heart. His heart is that we would know who we are, who he is, and what we are created to do. Jesus is the way, but the Father's heart is the destination. So let's see how this all plays together. So identity leads to relationship, and relationship releases purpose. When I know who I am, I know who God is, and I know what I'm created to do. When I know that I'm a beloved son or daughter, I will want to run into relationship, into his presence, and I'll spend my life building his kingdom. But the opposite is also true. When I resist his grace, I'll be afraid of his presence, and I'll spend my life doing my own thing. When I don't know who I am, I don't know who God is, and I have no clue what I was intended to do. When I am an orphan, I'll be afraid of the Father, and I'll spend my life trying to become significant. But what's even worse is that religion reverses that cycle. Religion says, do a lot of good things to earn your way back into God's presence, to pay for the brokenness of your past. See, this is the cycle of religion, and it is exhausting because it's not what God intended. We are drawn by grace. We're not driven by expectation. In other words, who you are determines what you do. In Jesus, we are righteous. Therefore, we live righteously. What we believe about ourselves shapes how we live. And when you understand that your identity has been changed in Jesus, it changes who you are and how you live. And so this is how we got our core theology. That God is good. Jesus has forgiven me. I am loved, and everything is possible. And this is the gospel. It's not just for salvation, but for our whole life. It's our deliverance and our healing to make us whole. It's not just a one-time thing, but for the rest of our lives, because there is always more of the Father's heart to discover.